Hi, welcome back. You're watching the late edition. So there is a diminished appetite, we're told, for black professionals to take up senior positions in the public sector, and that's because of the frustrations they encounter. Some of the organizations representing black professionals say their members are discouraged by the political interference and that sometimes doing the right thing can be met with intimidation.
In the way of the work. It seems that public sector and politicians, they seem to believe that they own these entities, and they can decide what must happen, when and how it must happen, who must come in, and those decisions often get in the way of what the professional knows needs to be done. Because there's a difference between a politician and a professional. Professionals go to school, go to university, get trained to occupy the positions that they occupy, only to be under a politician who, more often than not, has the basic education, and then they need to be told what needs to be done and how and who must be appointed in what role, when it just becomes too frustrating. And eventually then they find that they start looking for other opportunities elsewhere because it's just too frustrating.
Kganki Matabane is the Black Business Council CEO. He joins us now to further this conversation. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Matabane. One used to think that one of the major challenges that black professionals faced in the office room landscape used to be the pernicious racism. So now we're saying that 30 or so odd years into the democratic dispensation, there are different challenges, and not necessarily because people are black. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Good evening, Tsepiso and the SABC News viewer. The challenge I think that we're facing is that in the public sector we've got the political interference. In the private sector we've got the subtle racism. So the black professionals don't necessarily have a home. But because the private sector pays better than the public sector, they rather tolerate the subtle racism in the private sector rather than dealing with the political interference in the public sector. So the challenge with the public sector is that the best and the good and experienced black professionals rather don't prefer to go there, because even when you separate, because separation happens everywhere. It happens in the private sector, it happens in the public sector. But when it happens in the private sector, you'll just see a statement that says Tsepiso is going to pursue her own personal interest, even if the actual reason is something else. But that allows Tsepiso to then go and get another job. So it does not necessarily kill your career. But in the public sector, even if you are accused and wrongfully so, and you haven't done anything, it's because you refuse to appoint someone or you refuse to give a tender to someone, they splash you in the newspapers. So you find yourself in the front pages of newspapers and in other medias, and that basically kills your chances of pursuing your career. So that hence people are saying I rather tolerate the racism on the other side, because when we separate in a amicable way, and rather than come this side and be dealt with politicians who are trying to get things done incorrectly. Mm-hmm. And then the issue is that and now we're getting into coalitions government, it becomes even worse, because it was difficult even when we've got one party. But when we get coalitions, then it becomes very, very difficult, because sometimes during the coalition discussions and agreements, people will then divide certain departments to say, no, you will get department A, you'll get department B, and then you get someone who has got no clue of what is happening in that department, but because they've got the political office and a big ego and all those type of things, they think you owe them something, and they want to give you instructions to do wrong things. And most of the ethical professionals who are good, who can get jobs anywhere else, they'll refuse. So the risk is that we may end up having black professionals who can't get jobs in the private sector, who are the ones who are running the public sector.
Okay, let me jump in and ask this question. So I found it very interesting, the scenario that you painted, especially at local government level, where they are now coalition governments, and how that impacts on black people in middle or to senior management positions. So I just also want to understand, is it a social cultural identity issues where it is assumed that one person can speak to a black person about nefarious intent unabashedly, or are there still some boundaries?
Yeah, as far as we are experiencing it, there are no boundaries as far as it comes to black people, and when it comes to black professionals. So the politicians will willingly and decide to go and speak to black people and say, I need this, I need this, and this, but they don't do the same to the white professionals who are working in public sector. So they may be one way or the other inferiority complex when it comes to other races, but when it comes to black professionals, the politicians, some of the politicians, they feel entitled to say, we can instruct you to do this and this, even though you know this is not correct. And if you do it, the signature will be yours. And it means if there's a commission of inquiry at some stage, or there's an SIU investigation, it will be a signature that is there. Because this instructions don't even come in writing. They are verbal, so you will have nothing to prove to say, but I got this in from this person.
And do you think it's particular positions that are vulnerable to that practice? Because now we're talking about the public sector broadly, but I'd imagine that there are certain positions that are strategic enough. I'm thinking here procurement is the first thing that comes to mind, that this probably happens more often in those positions, or is also about upward mobility, people who want to get ahead, finding themselves being manipulated or somehow corralled into taking those illegal, maybe unprocedural actions.
Yes, I think it's the higher you go. So the higher you go in the echelons, the worse it becomes. So it happens mainly for senior people, executives, CEOs, CFOs, COOs, heads of procurement, and so on. But you're right, procurement is forever highly contested, and hence, in our submission for the public procurement bill, we propose that the procurement officials must be protected by the legislation, so that they should refuse any illegal instructions. They must follow the laws and the rules as they are, and then they must be able to have a place where they can report all these things. Hence, we're also saying the legislation that deals with whistleblowers needs to be strengthened, because what we've realized is that politicians have realized that if you whistleblow, the legislation does not necessarily protect you that much, the current legislation, because we've seen a lot of whistleblowers who gets into trouble. They lose all their livelihoods. They cannot be hired anywhere else by any employer, and they cannot make a living. So our proposal is that in the whistleblower legislation, there must be a provision that says the money that gets the money that gets recovered through whistleblowing and investigation should be put aside so that that money can take care of the financial needs of the whistleblowers. And that way it will protect people and it will encourage more people to be whistleblowers, because at the moment it's a bit dangerous. So what people do, instead of fighting systems and fighting against this corruption, they rather resign and go and look for another job somewhere else, which then perpetuates the problem.
Thank you so much for your time. Very interesting subject, which we had more time for. Kganki Matabane is the Black Business Council CEO, just speaking about the challenges that Black professionals particularly face in the public sector.